Hello art friends. In today's video, I have a very special Halloween collab for you guys. This video will feature 4 different narrators, other than myself, and I will have each of their channels and any other important links in the description box below. There will also be timestamps in case you want to re-listen to a certain story. Happy Halloween. Hope you're being safe. Trick or Treat Street by Hyper Obscura. The street. Every Halloween they gather at the underpass. It has become something of a tradition, a rite of passage for teenagers. Beyond the underpass lies an abandoned street. No one knows its name anymore. It cannot be found on any map. It's almost like it has never existed. For them, it is simply known as Trick or Treat Street. A brave few will dare the underpass, returning hours later, wide-eyed, sweating, trembling, sharing harrowing tales about what lies beyond. Gray, weather-beaten houses and brown, overgrown lawns as far as the eye can see. You can walk for hours without ever reaching the end. Reflected in the dark windows of the houses, you can sometimes see them, the lost residents. Pallid, anemic faces, expressionless and warped. Their empty eyes will follow you relentlessly. Sometimes you will hear a whisper, a soft murmur, beckoning you to reveal yourself, to come out of hiding. But you will remain hidden on the road. Never forget that. The real challenge isn't on the road, however. In order to truly prove yourself, you will have to leave the relative safety of the cracked concrete and venture into the eerie, decaying properties. You will have to step up to the front door, knock on it 3 times, and yell loudly, "Trick or treat!" Sometimes nothing will happen, and you can return to the road again. But sometimes they will open. And believe me, you will forever dream of those wretched beings. They will haunt you until the day you die. You may now return to the underpass. Your challenge is complete. Until next year. The residents of this particularly interesting street will wake up the morning after Halloween and excitedly swap tales with their neighbors. Because of the unexplained events set to take place the night of every Halloween, it is simply known as Trick or Treat Street. Some will tell you it's the most haunted street in the world. Most of the residents will recall hearing strange noises in the night, like the sound of naked feet running on concrete. Some will peer out of the windows, but they will never see anything. New residents, people who still do not know or believe, will shout terrified into the night, "I can hear you! Stop hiding! Come out!" Sometimes you may wake up to 3 rapid knocks on the door, followed by almost inaudible whispers. "Trick or treat." They will murmur softly from the other side. Do not open. If you let them in, they will never leave. They will seep into the foundations of your home and linger there restlessly, and you will be doomed to forever dream of those wretched beings. You may rest easy now. The night is over. Until next year.
Halloween is a big deal in my town. Every house goes all out in a competition to see who can freak out the most kids. Luckily for us, they also compete to see who can give out the best candy. It's pretty great, and this year, my friends and I were finally old enough to go trick-or-treating alone. I spent all day getting ready with my friends Ashley and Sherry. I was going as a vampire, Ashley was a witch, and Sherry was a werewolf. I was just putting some fake blood around my mouth as a finishing touch when Ashley gasped. "What's wrong?" I asked, without taking my eyes away from the mirror. "It's snowing." Shit. Remember when I said Halloween was a big deal in my town? Yeah, well, snow on Halloween was an even bigger deal in my town. It only happened once in my lifetime, and that was 10 years ago when I was 2, so I don't remember it at all. But that didn't matter. Every year in the days leading up to Halloween, the grown-ups in town would drill it into our heads that snow on Halloween was a bad sign, and that if it snowed, we had to follow the rules. The rules were: 1. If it snows on Halloween, every trick-or-treater wearing a mask will be asked to take it off before they can get candy. If you're wearing a mask, you must take it off before taking any candy. And 2, if someone refuses to take off their mask, do not offer them candy and do not speak to them. We didn't know the why behind the rules, but honestly, I didn't care. Sherry was the only one of us wearing a mask, after all. "Sucks to be you, Sherry," I joked. "Hope that giant fur ball of a mask is easy to take on and off." "Yeah, Cher. Michaela and I will leave you behind if you aren't fast enough," Ashley said with a laugh. Very funny, guys. The good news was that we were staying at Ashley's house for the night, and her mom wasn't much of a nagger, so I figured she'd give us a quick reminder of the rules as we went out the door, and that would be it. My mom, on the other hand, was definitely a nagger. I could sense her phone call before my cell phone even rang. "Yeah, Mom," I said as soon as I answered, not letting her get a word in. "Sherry's the only one wearing a mask, and she knows to take it off before getting candy. We won't talk to anyone who doesn't take their mask off. Blah, blah, blah. Love you and see you tomorrow." I hung up and giggled. Parents, am I right? After one last look at our costumes, to make sure they were perfect, we tumbled out the front door and into the snowy neighborhood. Our plan was to start at the house next door and work our way around the neighborhood as the night got darker. The inner streets had some seriously creepy-looking houses, and we wanted to hit those when it was good and dark out for maximum creep factor. "Do you think Josh and the guys will be out?" Ashley asked as we headed up the walkway to the nearest house. She had an obvious crush on Josh, but swore up and down that she didn't. "No idea, Ash," I said as I rang the doorbell. "Trick or treat!" As the night went on, Sherry got pretty quick at ripping her mask off her head the second she was asked. I had to give it to her, because she put it back on every time. I know the mask completed the werewolf costume, but I probably would have just left it off after the 4th or 5th house. Just before 9 o'clock, we hit the last house in the neighborhood. They were known to give out 2 full-size candy bars at the end of the night just to get rid of them. We ran past a group of kids who were just leaving and bounded up the steps. "Trick or treat!" "What great costumes! Go ahead and take 2 bars if you'd like," the woman at the door said. "But you 2 will have to take off your masks first." 2? I looked over at Sherry and saw another kid standing next to her. He was dressed as a scarecrow with a burlap sack over his head. The mouth was crookedly stitched on, and the eye holes were jaggedly cut. I shivered and looked away. Just some kid trying to get their last bit of candy like we were before the neighborhood shut off their porch lights and turned in for the night. I reached into the plastic pumpkin the woman was holding out and grabbed a Twix and a Milky Way. I looked over at Sherry, who was pulling off her mask. The scarecrow stood still next to her, his mask still on. Ashley grabbed her 2 bars and nudged Sherry. "Come on, Wolfie, let's go." Sherry grabbed her candy and turned to the scarecrow. "Hey, kid, you gotta take your mask off if you want any candy." "Sherry, you can't talk to him," I blurted out. "What?" She looked confused for a second before her mistake dawned on her. Oh shit, the rules. Sherry had moved to town 3 years ago, so the rules weren't as ingrained in her as they were in Ashley and I. We looked at the woman at the door nervously, hoping she would tell us the rules were just some silly made-up thing to make Halloween seem more scary. Instead, a look of pure terror crossed her face, and she yanked the plastic pumpkin back to her chest. "Run," she whispered before slamming her door shut and clicking the lock. Ashley and I grabbed Sherry and pulled her down the steps. We couldn't help but scream, though we didn't know exactly why the woman was so afraid. As we rounded the corner of the sidewalk, I turned to look behind us. I let out a shriek when my eyes met the jagged, empty eye holes of the scarecrow's mask. He was right behind us. "Faster!" I yelled, pulling on my friend's hands as I sprinted down the sidewalk toward Ashley's house. If we could just make it inside, we'd be safe from whatever this thing chasing us was. Over the ragged gasps of our breath as we ran, I heard the sound of straw rubbing together as the scarecrow gained on us. Finally, I saw the illuminated front porch of Ashley's house. The three of us sprinted up the front steps faster than we'd ever dreamed of running in gym class. Ashley reached for the doorknob and froze. It was locked. She fumbled for her key as Sherry and I pounded on the door for her mom to open up. I could hear the rustling sound of the scarecrow getting louder. Just when I thought my heart would beat straight out of my chest, Ashley swung the door open and pulled us inside. She slammed the door shut and locked it before turning the porch light off. As we collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, my eyes turned to the side table by the door. On it was a piece of notebook paper. I picked it up and read it quickly before crumpling it up. "Your mom got called in for an emergency shift at the hospital, Ash. We're alone." Before Ashley could respond, there was a loud bang on the front door. The scarecrow was here, and it was mad. "We have to barricade the door," I said, standing up and grabbing the side table. Ashley got up and grabbed the other side of the table so we could move it up against the door, while Sherry dragged over a chair from the living room. Bang! Something hit the window above us as the front doorknob rattled at the same time. "Is there more than one of them?" Sherry asked. "No idea, but we need to get away from the door now," I said as I scrambled for the staircase. I figured being off the ground floor was safest. We ran into Ashley's room and started pushing her desk up against the door. I was pretty sure the scarecrow outside was no ordinary kid, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if it got to us. "Guys, I'm so sorry," Sherry said through choked sobs. "I didn't even think. I just thought it was some dumb kid, and It's okay, Cher," I said. "We're gonna be okay." Bang. All three of us shrieked in unison as Ashley's bedroom window shook from the force of being hit. I turned to look and saw those jagged, empty eye holes pressed up against the window. "How did it get up here?" Ashley screamed. "I don't know, but we need to hide," I said. "Follow me." I ran to the closet and ushered them inside, closing the door tight behind us. We huddled together behind Ashley's hanging clothes, our backs pressed up as far against the closet wall as we could. The angry banging on Ashley's window continued. I braced myself for the sound of the window shattering from the force of the scarecrow's blows, but instead, another bang sounded from the door to Ashley's bedroom. Next, another from the window, then the door, then the window. Sherry wept beside me while Ashley rocked back and forth. I prayed to God that I wouldn't skip school again, and I'd do all my chores, and I'd never ever do anything bad again if he'd just let us live. The assault on Ashley's window and door went on for hours. I swore I could hear the rustling of straw rubbing together from just outside the closet door. I was certain the door would open at any second, and the thing dressed as a scarecrow would drag us down to hell with it. But finally, the banging stopped. We waited in silence for minutes, huddled together in fear. Silence. I pulled out my cell phone and checked the time. 12:05 a.m., November 1st. We made it.
The reason I stay inside on Halloween by Poor Old Jack. I've always liked Halloween. I loved to trick or treat as a kid, and as an adult, I enjoyed watching horror movies with friends and carving pumpkins. A couple of years ago, my buddies even convinced me to go to a haunted house with them. It was a fun night just about every year, and I always looked forward to it. But I don't go out on Halloween anymore. I stay inside with the blinds shut and the lights off, and I think you'll soon understand why. This all started 3 years ago on October 30th. I was talking on the phone with a friend of mine who, for the sake of privacy, I'll call Jake. Jake was unpredictable, which was usually fun, but sometimes got us into trouble. Which is why when he invited me to a Halloween party that a good friend of his was throwing, I was a bit hesitant. "Come on, man. What else you gonna do tomorrow? You already said you didn't have plans," he persuaded. Jake had a point. I've never really been one for getting drunk or partying. Then again, I've never really been one for sitting at home by myself all night either. All of my other friends already had plans, and this might have been my only chance to get out on Halloween. As I weighed my options in my head, Jake let out a final, "Well?" I gave a short sigh and smiled. "Yeah, sure, I'll go," I said. Jake excitedly assured me that it'd be fun, and told me he'd pick me up at 8 the next night. Driving to that party the next day, I couldn't help but feel a bit anxious. I didn't know anybody there, except for Jake. But knowing one person at a party is a lot better than knowing nobody at a party. Jake made me feel a lot more comfortable that I wouldn't be alone. I was going as Jack from The Shining, and Jake was going as Slash from Guns N' Roses. "You ready to rock?" he joked as we pulled up to the house. I nodded as we exited the car and walked to the house. The aroma of alcohol hovered heavily over the room like fog, and beneath it the smell of marijuana flowed lightly through the house. In some rooms it seemed like there was a body for every square foot. Music blasted throughout the house, and I couldn't tell if the music or the talking was louder. Jake introduced me to the guy who was throwing the party, who I'll call Mitch. We chatted for a bit, but it was only minutes before me and Jake were going over to get beers. I didn't like to get drunk, but 2 light beers didn't do all that much besides helping me relax. The party just kind of dragged on, like a mediocre movie that you're only halfway paying attention to. Jake was with me throughout, though I could tell he was a lot more drunk and having a lot more fun than I was. And after about 2 hours, I was getting bored. The constant noise and uncomfortable heat from the crowd wore me down as well. The moon was big that night, and it shone enough that I had a faint shadow. After walking several blocks, I noticed a forest to my left, one that extends all the way to my house, so I decided to cut through it to get home faster. It was strange. Something felt a little bit, off about it. I quickly shook that feeling off, however, deciding that it was nothing. The moon was casting faint shadows of the trees' long, thin branches. Brown and orange leaves littered the ground. The wind calmly blew through the trees, and I could hear an owl calling somewhere to my right. I walked down the forest trail in silence. Something stopped me in my tracks. It was a jack-o'-lantern with a cheerful carved expression, sitting there on the side of the trail. I was confused, to say the least. Who would put a jack-o'-lantern out here? Who would they think would see it? I kept walking, mystified by the strangeness of what I'd seen, but I'd choked it up to the workings of someone with a bit too much Halloween spirit. As I continued down the trail, I noticed a flickering orange light ahead, dancing on the surrounding trees and ground. When I got closer, I realized it was another jack-o'-lantern. This one was different. Its face wasn't cheery like the last one. It looked nervous, afraid, paranoid even. And not just in a cartoony emoticon sort of way. It looked too real. I could feel the emotion by looking at its face. I began to feel that way that the pumpkin looked. Paranoid. I noticed my heart beat a little faster. I looked around and behind me and kept walking, now keeping a quicker pace. I can't explain why. Things around me began to seem more disturbing. The shadows of tree branches began to look more and more like outstretched fingers, clawing at the trail. The wind began to sound less like a whistle, more like an eerie, drawn-out scream. Noises started to sound more ominous, like the whole forest was out to get me. I thought that was bad. What I saw next was the last thing I wanted to see. A third jack-o'-lantern. This one bore a face that can only be described in one word. And that one word is terror. I could see it. I could feel it. I could practically taste it in my soul. I froze where I stood, jaw hanging open. My heart was racing. My lungs filled and emptied in short succession. I sped along, walking as fast as I could. All I wanted was to get home. All I wanted was for this to be over. I was looking left, right, and over my shoulder constantly. Visions of a serial killer in a hockey mask danced through my mind. Hiding behind every tree, waiting to jump out and turn me into mincemeat. I thought that maybe I was crazy. Maybe there wasn't anything to worry about. My mind tried to tell me that, but I wasn't convinced. As all these thoughts bounced around my brain, I wasn't paying any attention. I wasn't watching the path. Out of nowhere, like a flash of lightning, my foot caught on a root sticking out of the dirt, and I fell face down into the cold, hard dirt. After a moment, I shook off the initial shock and looked up in front of me. I wish I hadn't. Before me, a mere foot from my face, was a jack-o'-lantern. Its face was pure shock and horror. It had an axe chopped right into its head. There was blood dripping down from the wound. It was real. I could smell it, the metallic stench that blood gives off. At that moment, I swear on my life that my heart stopped. I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. Only one thing could break me out of my trance of horror. The sound of footsteps, rustling in the leaves, mere yards behind me. Every fiber of my being told me to do one thing. Run. I scrambled to my feet and ran faster than I had ever in my entire life. I don't think I could ever run that fast again. I swear I could hear footsteps running behind me the whole way home. I looked over my shoulder as I ran out into the street. Nobody was there. When I turned back around to face my house, I saw something that made me sick to my stomach. A jack-o'-lantern on my porch that said "Welcome home." I rushed inside and called the police. They didn't find anything in or outside of the house. Nothing in the forest either. I can't explain what happened out there in the woods that Halloween night. But one thing is for sure. Someone or something was following me. And it knows where I live.
A letter to my murderer. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. I don't think you even knew my name when you stole my life from me. I was faceless. One of many that happened to cross your path late at night, and in your mind, that made us worthy of death. None of the others you have murdered speak to me. I don't know if they can. I tried speaking to one of the other victims, but you must have cut her tongue out. She couldn't remember how to speak. All the others were blindly screaming into the void and were filled with despair. Every Halloween, your death count grows higher, and today is Halloween. I've seen you with your family. The happy family man. A double life. To everyone else, you are the perfect son, a loving husband, a caring father, and a pillar of the community. The perfect mask. It is only your victims who have seen your true face. I remember, I was walking home alone from the baby shower. I wanted some fresh air and always thought the area was a safe one. Everything was going well for me. All my dreams were coming true. The night was peaceful, happy, and you would almost expect there to be some ominous sign of impending doom. There was nothing. I was in such good spirits. You pulled up in your car and asked for directions. To one of the local diners, I think. You seemed so friendly, kind, and even asked how long until I would give birth. I told you, and you were happy for me. You invited me into your car, and I had a feeling something was off, so I declined. You faked a heart attack. When I opened the door to help you, you thanked me. You actually thanked me. And when I got my phone out of my bag to call the ambulance, you threw it on the road and broke it. You yanked me into the car, and I heard a noise, and everything went black. I remember waking up. My head was spinning. As I looked up into the tree canopy, I was slowly being dragged along the forest floor. I could feel the leaves in my fingertips. I remember digging my hands into the soil. The dirt and the mud lifting up. There was a fallen tree log that I gripped tightly onto, and my fingernails slowly peeled off. It didn't take us long to reach your favorite spot. You stripped me of everything that I knew. Everything that I am. Anything that I could have been in the future. I did nothing to you. Nothing. I could smell the aroma of rotting flesh, moist dirt, and the smell of ash. I looked over and saw human bones. I felt the knife move through my flesh, and the sudden chill. You didn't even think to kill me quickly. Why? I remember trying to keep my organs inside my body. The fucking cold. The cold on them. You stole my future from me. I tried to hold them in my hands and desperately tried to push them back in. I remember trying to run, wanting to run. I don't know where I am. You did it as slowly as possible. I saw the smug look of pleasure in your eyes as you stole my life from me. All my dreams, everything gone. No one has found me yet, and I don't want to stay here. You buried me in a shallow grave, a ditch by the roadside. I can hear the cars drive past, but no one can hear me when I cry out for them. I will never see my parents again. I know they must be worried about me. I know they're looking for me. Occasionally I manage to look through the window at them. They haven't slept properly for weeks. There are boxes of posters. They leap up whenever they hear the phone ring. Occasionally, I manage to tap the glass to get their attention. Sometimes they look, but they can never see me. They can never hear me. I am never going to feel my husband's arms around me again. I was 21 when you stole my life. We were just starting out together. All my hopes and dreams. I will never feel his touch again. Everything we dreamed of together is now gone. I watch him sit in our empty house, crying and pleading for answers. He holds our wedding photo in his hands, and I hope he doesn't try to join me. He has looked at his pistol one too many times for my liking. I can't help him. I can't hear him. I will never move into our first home with him. I will never see him be promoted at work. I will never be able to curl up on the couch with him again. We will never get to hold our child in our arms. It's so cold, and I want to go home. To truly go home. Every so often I get a chance to watch you. You bring another body of another dead woman and leave her here with us. There is no pause nor reflection about what you have done. You come and you sit among the graves. Occasionally you fondle a token you stole from us, all to remember us. You don't know our names. You call us by the streets you found us on. You keep bringing more and more women to join us. Some in the pit, some in the grave. Why are you doing this? Please tell me. You knew I was pregnant when you came for me. You cut out my baby. I can still feel you slice the skin and pull it out. A piece is now missing. I couldn't stop you. Why did you do this? Where did you take her? I want her back. You stole my baby from me. And now I've come to claim yours.
I think it's finally time that I write this down. It's haunted me for years, but maybe this will help me move on. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what happened that night. I was 15. My girlfriend, her brother, my best friend, and I had come up with the brilliant idea to stay out all night on Halloween. We had the perfect plan. My friend Art, not his real name, and I would tell our parents that we were going to spend the night at Layla's and Will's, not their real names, house. Likewise, Layla would tell her parents that she and Will would be spending the night at my house. I know, it was stupid, but we were confident that our plan would work. I wish the plan had failed. That Halloween night, we'd set out feeling like total rebels. We'd all decided on a group costume, and each of us was dressed as a DC superhero. Will had dressed as Superman, Art was the Flash, Layla was Supergirl, and I was Batgirl. We were all pumped. We had the whole night to stuff our faces with candy, hang out, and do whatever we wanted to. After we'd trick-or-treated for about 3 hours, I'm not kidding, people started shutting their doors. By 12, there wasn't a single light on or door open. We 4 were the only people out on the street, and with the exception of a barking dog, there was no noise. Layla and I were bored, and I asked if we should just go home. Will refused. "You're at a sleepover at my house, remember? And I'm sleeping at yours. Do you want to be the one to admit to your mom that you lied?" "Come on, Will," Art spoke up. He'd been eating a lot of candy and had been pretty quiet for the last few minutes, likely battling a massive stomachache. "This isn't as fun as you said it would be. Maybe it'd be better if we just went home and told the truth. They'd be mad, but maybe we can still have an actual sleepover." Will looked at each of us and realized that he was the only one who wanted to stay out. He sighed and looked like he was about to relent. Then he looked behind us, and his face lit up like a jack-o'-lantern. "What's that?" he said excitedly, already beginning to move towards it. I turned around. Not 20 feet away was a house that I'd never seen before on our street. It looked like a typical townhouse. That's usually what you see in our neighborhood, but it was covered from porch to chimney with Halloween decorations. And not the cheap plastic ones you get at the dollar store, but the quality makes you want to run decorations that give kids nightmares. There were 2 disturbingly lifelike pumpkin-headed scarecrows guarding the front gate, and over 24 skeletons standing at attention in the front yard. Jack-o'-lanterns dotted the porch, each one with a face frozen in agony. A gigantic spider was perched in the show window, looking like it intended to make the shrub it was hovering over its next meal. Bones were scattered across the roof, as if someone had just dropped a handful of them from the sky. And, for the finishing touch, a spotlight hidden among the shrubbery made the entire house glow an eerie purple. Layla and I glanced at each other. How had we not seen this house earlier? Granted, we hadn't been paying close attention to every house we passed, but still, we'd been all over town. We'd have noticed a glowing purple house, right? I turned to ask Art, but he was just as entranced as Will. Before I could blink, he was running towards the house too. Once again, I glanced at Layla. She shrugged her shoulders, as if asking what I expected from 2 Halloween-crazed boys. I grabbed her hand, and we ran after them. Up close, the house was even more disturbing. The scarecrows eyed us as we walked through the front gate. I tried not to gag as I passed them. Someone had certainly taken liberties to make the yard believable. The things stank like rotting pumpkins. I gripped Layla's hand a little tighter as we passed the skeletons. They must be from one of those expensive artisan websites, I thought. They sure didn't look fake. We walked up the porch steps, with Will shaking from excitement. Art's eyes were practically glowing. I remember wondering, half-jokingly, if they were in some kind of trance. Will rang the doorbell. It was the sound of a church bell and resonated throughout the house. "Trick or treat," we shouted dutifully, although Layla was practically crushing my hand. I was grateful for it. I needed to know that I wasn't the only one who found all of this unsettling. The door was practically thrown open. A gorgeous woman stood in the doorway. She had long legs, thick copper hair that stopped at her shoulders, black eyeliner, and blood-red lipstick. She was dressed in a revealing witch costume, and grinned when she saw the 4 of us. Well, when she saw the boys. My, I didn't expect to be visited by 2 handsome heroes tonight." She gave a high-pitched giggle. Her voice reminded me of how ladies in old gangster movies talked. Art smiled and thanked her. Will was just staring at her. I took a step closer to Layla. That's when the lady noticed us. I think she knew immediately that we weren't as captivated as the boys were. Not by her house or her beauty. Sure, she was gorgeous, but she was an adult, and I was already with Layla. Her eyes glazed over as she saw us, but her smile didn't waver. I noticed then that she was holding a bowl of candy. She slowly extended it to me. "Candy, Batgirl." I wrapped both of my arms around Layla and took a step backwards from the lady. I could tell she wanted something, and that it wasn't anything good. "No thanks, we've eaten too much candy already." It wasn't a lie. We'd eaten half of our candy throughout the evening. The woman's smile wavered, and she blinked 3 times, as if it was the last thing she'd expected. I noticed something strange about her eyes. They were kind of cloudy. She turned and offered candy to the boys. Will took a full handful, while Art only took 2, obviously still suffering from a stomachache. I glanced again at the candy. The pieces weren't in wrappers, and it didn't look like any brand I'd ever seen. It sort of resembled malted milk balls, except bigger and lumpier. When the boys had finished their candy, the woman looked at the 4 of us. "You must be parched. Why don't you come in for some apple cider?" She gestured to the front door, which stood gaping open, like a mouth. Layla physically leaned away from the door. She wouldn't go in there for $1,000, let alone a glass of cider. I agreed with her. I forced a smile. "No, thank you." We turned and started to get down off the porch when I realized that Layla and I were alone. Will and Art were gone, and so was the woman. My heart rate tripled. They went in the house. My stomach hurt. Should we call the police? What could we say? That a pretty lady with a spooky yard had lured 2 boys into her house with apple cider? Even if that didn't sound crazy, we were 2 teenagers out past midnight on Halloween. Not exactly what the cops would consider trustworthy. Plus, we couldn't prove that she wanted to hurt the boys. Still, we had to make sure that they were okay. We started walking around the house. On the left side, there weren't any windows. This made sense, though, it being a townhouse and all. The back of the house had a porch, but the windows and doors were all covered. The right side of the house yielded the same results as the left, leaving us only one option: the show window. We maneuvered around the skeletons in the yard and went as close as we dared up to the window. I, being dressed in black and thus harder to see, decided to look in the window, while Layla, dressed in bright red and blue, made sure the lady didn't come out of the house. Before peering in, I took an uneasy glance at the giant spider. Against my better judgment, I touched it. Solid plastic. I sighed and told myself not to be so jumpy. I peered through the window. I was staring at a lit fireplace. It seemed to be the only light source in the room. It was pretty dim in there. Still, I could make out 2 enormous armchairs on either side of the fireplace. I could make out Art's bright red Flash costume, and I could see the blue from Will's costume. They were both slumped in the chairs, as if asleep. There was a coffee table between the chairs, holding 2 half-empty glasses of what could only be apple cider. In the center of the room stood the lady. She was standing up as straight as a rod, her arms lifeless at her sides. Then, with no warning, her right arm shot straight up. She held it there for a second, then let it fall. A second later, she did it again, with the other arm. Then, I swear, she started growling. As if this was a signal, Will and Art got up. I could tell that their eyes were closed, but they came right over to her. She put her left index finger on Art's forehead, and her right index finger on Will's forehead, and she began to chant. Veneninum santiatum, age, puer, languorem santias, nesico quomodo, lantianam, loqui, ut alligent. All 3 of them suddenly began to convulse. Art went down, followed by Will. They both started to kick wildly. Then their kicks became weaker, as if they were losing energy. Then they stopped. I must have made a noise. Layla told me later that tears were streaming down my face. I must have sobbed without knowing it, because the lady turned around. Her eyes were completely blue, with no pupils to be seen. Her mouth was hanging open, with saliva the color of her eyes dripping from her lips, and her face was starting to melt. I screamed. Layla screamed. I shoved myself away from the window and landed flat on my back. The wind was knocked out of me, but I was too scared to care. Layla yanked me to my feet, and we just started running. We charged through the skeletons, which I now thoroughly believe were real. As we charged through the gate, I knocked over one of the scarecrows. Its head smashed to bits on the ground, revealing a human skull underneath. We ran, not knowing where we were going and not caring. We finally ended up in front of my house, and we both collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing. I told my mom everything. At first she thought I was making up a story to get out of lying to her, but one look at our faces and she knew we were serious. She called the cops immediately. When they investigated the strange house, they made a shocking discovery. It belonged to a Miss Smith, not her real name, who was a woman in her 20s and fit our descriptions. But she'd been on vacation in Alabama with her mother for the last 2 days. They never found their bodies. Art and Will remain missing to this day. The police don't believe our account of some life-sucking witch. They believe that a child predator drugged them and ran off with them. I don't think Layla and I ever really got over it. We broke up in 12th grade when she and her family moved away for a fresh start. A few months later, I moved too. We text now and then, but we aren't as close as we used to be. Still, I'm glad I've saved her number all of these years, because tonight I saw something that brought back that traumatic Halloween. A townhouse, bathed in purple light, with skeletons set up in the front yard. 2 of them guard the gate. One is dressed in a Superman costume. The other is dressed as the Flash.
Pumpkin Carver by Hyper Obscura. Look, I know it's not like a normal job. I mean, it's just 1 week of the year after all. But still, it's what I do, you know? It's what I'm known for. I am a pumpkin carver. Give me a pumpkin and I'll turn it into a true work of art. A gourd Mona Lisa. You won't find anyone, anywhere, that can do the things I do. I promise you that. I specialize in faces. I can carve that pumpkin into any face, and you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. I am that good. Give me a picture, or a name, or just a description, and I'll make you a doppelganger. A pumpkin twin. It will slowly deteriorate and rot. But I think that's why they want them, you know. It's like a gruesome, decomposing representation. A mirrored, corrupted version of the chosen visage. A number? I don't have any. Thousands? Tens of thousands? More? I truly don't know. But I've been doing this for 40 years. The faces, maybe 10. You've got to stand out, you know. Find your niche. And I think I've accomplished that. But at some point you realize nothing lasts forever. One day, someone better will come along. It's just life, you know? Evolution. If that's the reason, I guess, yeah, maybe. Look, I knew it wasn't going to last, but I wasn't ready to be forgotten, to be just another footnote in history. And I was an artist. I am an artist. And I want to be remembered alongside the greats, the masters. Turning pumpkins into faces? That's not something for history. That's never gonna count as fine art. No matter the finesse, the skill, the techniques, the near uncanny likeness, it's still just carving holes into a fruit, you know. The masters? Who I consider the greats? I don't know. I guess it's the usual ones, you know? Like Kemper, Gain, Dahmer, Chikatilo, Fish, I suppose. The really graphic ones. The really deranged ones. They just, you know, walk that extremely thin line between madness and genius. True artists carving their messages into the bodies of their victims for the whole world to marvel. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to outdo them. Turning pumpkins into faces just wouldn't cut it. Turning faces into pumpkins? Now that's art. You have to really know how to sculpt the flesh, carve the bone, work the skin. Keeping them alive was the hard part. That kind of trauma has a way of shutting down the systems, you know? but the handful that made it were beautiful, true masterpieces. But you know that, don't you? You've seen them. You found them down there in my basement, living, fleshly, breathing pieces of true art for the world to marvel at. So yeah, that's me. I am no longer just a pumpkin carver. I am the pumpkin carver. Huge thank you to Insidious Nebula, Lady Spookaria, A Clock Strikes 3, and Mistress of Creepypasta for submitting Halloween stories for you guys. I really hope you like them. You should definitely check out those narrators' channels. They will be linked below. And you should definitely check out Hyper Obscure's Reddit. Those stories creep me out. Huge thanks to Hyper Obscure for letting me read those stories as well. Please be safe out there, guys, if you do go out. And if you don't go out, I hope you're at least watching a scary movie. And I'm sorry my neighbor's dog is barking like a mad dog. Alright, thank you so much for watching. Until the next video. Bye.